to quickly run over the biochemistry of respiration just for revision in this video. So just firstly, you might remember about the two energy carriers that we spoke about. So you have ADP, okay, in your cells, and ADP, you might be asked to abbreviate that. So remember we spoke about adenosine. So that's adenosine diphosphate. And if they ask you then for ATP, you're going to say it's adenosine triphosphate. Now they might ask you a little bit about the structure of ATP. So if they do, you're just going to say that it contains the adenine base, okay, that it has the ribose sugar, OSE for sugar, remember, and then that it has the 3 phosphates, and that the energy is stored here between the second and the third phosphate. So this is a high energy molecule, ATP, whereas ADP is a lower energy molecule. The process of adding a phosphate to ADP, forming ATP, remember we said was called phosphorylation. So the process of adding a phosphate, phosphorylation. And they might also ask you for the advantages of having ATP in a cell. Now, so ATP is available in every cell, and what's it used for? Well, it provides energy. So when the ATP breaks down, you're going to have energy, and that energy then is available for any metabolic reaction that has to happen in your cell. So if you want your muscles to contract so that you can move, that requires energy. If you want to have brain activity, that requires energy. If you need to make protein because you're growing, that requires energy. Repairing cells require anything, any reaction that occurs in your body. Active transport requires energy. Mitosis requires energy. Anything at all that requires energy. Where does the energy come from? It comes from ATP. Okay, now another advantage maybe of ATP is that it's available, the energy that's released is available for immediate use, okay? The energy is released in manageable or fixed quantities. You could say that too. That would be another advantage of ATP. The energy is released easily. The ADP is recycled in the cell and it's used to make more ATP again. That's another advantage of ATP. So anything like that would be an advantage of ATP, okay? The other energy carrier then that we'll just look at before we start about the respiration itself. Remember you had your NAD+. Now NAD+, again, this is harder now, but you do still need to be able to abbreviate this. Nicotine amide. This is adenine now, remember, whereas ATP was adenosine. So be careful there, adenine, and then diphosphate, okay? Diphosphate. So that's a low energy molecule, the NAD+. And how do you convert that to a high energy molecule? Well, remember we would have said that the not ADP. Remember NADP plus was when you're talking about photosynthesis. So P for NADP, P for photosynthesis. So anytime I mention NAD plus now, it's respiration. So there's no P. 2 electrons, and then what you get? You get NAD minus, and then that NAD minus reacts with a proton or H plus, and you form your NADH, which is your high energy molecule that goes to the electron transport system. Remember, we would have said anytime we produce NADH, we would have written ETS next to that because the NADH molecules end up in the electron transport system. Okay? Now, the next thing now that I want to move on to respiration. So you know your definition. You have aerobic and anaerobic respiration definitions, and you must know the balanced equation for respiration, okay? So if your glucose molecule, 6 CO2, making 6 carbon dioxide, 6 water, and you form your energy then, or your ATP. And remember, we also would have said that it divides, you have 2 stages. Stage 1, we said, was called glycolysis. And when we broke up that word, what does it mean? It means you're splitting a molecule of glucose. Why are you splitting a molecule of glucose? Because there's energy stored in the bonds. And when you break bonds, you release energy. So you need to break down the glucose molecule to release energy, and then that energy that's released, that's trapped, or that's what's producing your ATP and your NADH. The other stage of glycolysis, or not glycolysis, but respiration, is Krebs cycle and the electron transport system. So in the exam questions, they'll refer to stage 1, stage 2. So stage 1 is glycolysis, stage 2 includes Krebs cycle and the electron transport system. And you must know the definitions of aerobic and anaerobic respiration, and you must have the balanced chemical equation for respiration. Now, where in the cell does respiration occur? Respiration occurs in the mitochondria. And remember when we would have drawn Mitochondria, you draw them sort of like that. So you have the outer membrane, and then you have your cristae, are the infoldings, remember? And then inside here is the lumen, all right? So basically the cytosol of the cell is out here, all right? So remember now, this is my organelle, this is my mitochondria here. So the cytoplasm is outside the organelles. The jelly-like substance then is called the cytosol, if you like. So remember, the cytosol is the cytoplasm minus the organelles, so the liquidy stuff is your cytosol. So they might ask you, where in the cell do the stages occur? So we would have said that glycolysis, or stage 1, occurs in the cytosol, whereas stage 2 occurs in the mitochondria. And just remember, other types of exam questions they might ask you there is, what types of cells would have lots of mitochondria? Remember, high energy cells would require a high number of mitochondria. So like sperm cells or nerve cells would require lots of energy as well, so they'd need lots of mitochondria, whereas fat cells would require less, so just try and remember those kind of things as well. Now, so I'm going to start off with stage 1, which remember we said was called glycolysis. And what happens in stage 1? Well, you're going to split your glucose, okay? Where does this happen? It happens in the cytosol. Does it require oxygen? No oxygen required. But you're actually only releasing very small amounts of energy in glycolysis. So we're going to split the glucose, the C6H12O6, up into 2 molecules of, we would have called it pyruvic acid. Just watch, sometimes in the questions they'll call it pyruvate. Okay, it's the same thing. So 2 molecules of pyruvic acid. Now, this is a 6-carbon molecule, glucose. But pyruvic acid then is a 3-carbon molecule. So that's why you make 2 of them when you split the 1 glucose molecule. Okay, when you split or break the glucose molecule into 2 pyruvic acids, that does release small amount of energy. You're making 2 ATPs there. Now, what would you be making that from? You'd be making it from ADP and P, and the energy that comes from breaking the bonds, that energy is used to produce the ATP from the ADP and P. Okay, remember, adding a phosphate to the ADP called phosphorylation. Now, you also make NADH. Now, when we were doing this in school, we would have learned that you made 2 NADHs. Don't worry about the number of NADHs. They just want you to know that you're producing NADH as well. And remember, what will you produce NADH from? 2 electrons and a proton. So if you're forming 2 NADHs, if you want to keep that, 2, 4, 2, okay? So, but like I said, don't overly worry about the number of NADHs, just that you're making NADH, all right? So do you remember now, we would have completed a table after we did the biochemistry, and we would have had location, requirement, product, fate of product down the left, and then glycolysis and Krebs cycle and the electron transport system across the top. That table is really important. So location of glycolysis, the cytosol, okay? Now, what's the requirement for glycolysis? What do you need for glycolysis? Well, you need glucose, okay? Where would we get that glucose? Well, animal cells get it from their diet. So you eat food that's rich in sugar, carbohydrates, then your digestive system breaks down that food to produce small, soluble glucose molecules. So food, we get it from our diet. And any glucose that we don't use to produce energy, we store it as glycogen. So remember, they might ask you for the storage polysaccharide. Glycogen is how we store glucose. And where do we store it? We store it in our liver and we store it in our muscles, okay? If you're a plant, then you have to, obviously you don't eat carbohydrate, you don't take it in your diet, so you have to make it yourself during photosynthesis. And they store excess glucose after they photosynthesize, they store it as starch. So be careful about the polysaccharides. So the animal food storage, polysaccharide, you're talking about glycogen, and in plants you're talking about starch. Okay, and then the products of glycolysis, well, what's the product of glycolysis? Pyruvic acid. And the fate of that product, this is going to go now into Krebs cycle. So that's the second stage now. So I'm on to stage 2 now of respiration, which is called Krebs cycle, and I'll do the electron transport system in a second.